Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here at our last session with Jonathan Yellowhair. For some of you, this might be your first time. Some of you, this might be your second or third. So thank you for being here. Again, you being here, this will be a recorded event. Anything that you say during this time, you're more than welcome to share. This is a safe space. We'll get edited out at a later time, okay? So just wanted you guys to be aware of that. And then like an hour from now, I'm gonna drop the event evaluation to get attendance. And then also for you to be able to get a prize out of it, an incentive out of it too for being here. But yeah, no, I just wanted to appreciate you all and everybody that watches the recording as well. Appreciate you all for watching Jonathan's Yellow Hair webinar series for this semester. So it's been pretty cool. And again, I want to introduce Jonathan Yellow Hair on this session. So here you go. Take it away, Jonathan.
It's funny you said you watched Jonathan's yellow hair. So
Yeah.
just watch it. No, I don't have yellow hair. It's funny, people think that's like the funniest thing ever, like, or that they're the first person that's ever said it. Like sometimes I'll meet people and especially when I was back east, you know, they'd be like, "Oh, Jonathan yellow hair," and I'm like, "Yeah." And then they just pause and they'd like giggle and they'd be like, "But you don't have yellow hair." And I'm like, oh, so good, you
Oh
know.
no.
So it's just funny, like, okay, like, all right, but they say it like they're the very first person that said it, and it's like, so anyways, so my name is Jonathan Yellowhair as a reminder, so in case you can't read. But yeah, it's good to be back and it's good to be with y'all. And so we've had some good sessions, some good talks, had some good information. I've learned a lot from y'all as well in that sense. And so, but for those of you that haven't met me yet, my name is Jonathan Yellowhair, and I work as a substance abuse counselor at Native Americans for Community Action, which is a facility here in Flagstaff, Arizona. We work primarily with Indigenous clients, so probably about 85% of our clients are Indigenous. Probably 50% are from the Navajo Nation, which is where I'm from. And so, but in that regard too, the work I do, I'm a substance abuse counselor, so I work with clients who are mandated from the courts, whether for DUIs, domestic violence cases, child protective service cases, but I also do individual therapy. So just meeting with, clients one on one who self-refer. And so, but I was really honored when they talked about doing this series and whatnot and everything. And so, and I look forward to maybe doing them in the future as well. And so, but yeah, it's good to be here. And so we'll go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that all right, Julio?
Yes, I can see it.
Well, actually, let's move it over here. So screen. So we'll move you all over here and then that over there. And so, all right, still see it?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's start the slideshow. So, today we're going to talk about creating a healthy rhythm in your life. And this is through creating healthy energy, right, in that sense. And so, um, but rhythm right's really important to us as indigenous people, right, in that sense. And you talk about the rhythm of life, there's a lot of things that can disturb it in that sense, right? And so, and we definitely feel that, right, in our bodies, souls, minds, when it's like, oh, there's something that was put on me or something that even was put on my family before, that man, it's heavy, man, it's really heavy and it disrupts my rhythm, right? Or may send me on a whole different trajectory. So today we're going to talk a bit about how to maybe get that trajectory back on track, in that sense, and kind of familiarize with ourselves with this notion of rhythms, right? But first, I'd like to go over like what we kind of already went over, and so to reiterate, so the first session we went over the feelings wheel, in that regard, how to be emotionally intelligent, how to through the development of your emotional vocabulary. And so, and this is really vital and important in that regard because sometimes a lot of us aren't really taught um, our how to use emotions, right? We're just kind of taught, oh, this is, you're just feeling somehow, you're just feeling upset about something. And so, but I'd like to, just like we did last time, in that regard, I'd like to check in with y'all real quick so you can give it a quick spin or quick try, right? And so yeah, I'd like, for y'all to, because we use this in Mark classes and things, just check in with what you're feeling in the outside ring. And so how you may be feeling from today. And so for me, while y'all look, I'll go ahead and check in. So today, um, I guess I should say right now. Right now, I'm um, feeling really thankful, honestly. And so, I'm excited. The next 3 days is pretty cool. There's a powwow that one of the high schools is facilitating, so I'm gonna take my son there. We're gonna chill and see some family and relax, and everything. I'm just excited because this week was super hectic. Last week I was in a conference, so this week's all catch up. So I'm definitely excited for this weekend and but just thankful. Like, it's just really thankful to have family and be close to people and things like that. So what about you, Julio? How you checking in? All right. I like that. Yeah. I'm big on food too, man. So I'm always excited the next in about a month or two when graduation season comes around. Man, it's eating good. And so in that sense. Okay. Who's next? Anyone else want to check in? How you feeling today? How you feeling from the feelings wheel? When you get in the right place, it's like, oh, you can kind of talk freely about it. And when it's interesting when I go to groups like, because I'm a person in recovery from alcohol myself, and it's interesting going to meetings and times like you go to AA and like, and people will laugh, like there's, people tell their stories about, oh, when I got, like pulled over for my DUI or something, and they'll do something, ridiculous while and everybody kind of laughs about it like, oh, because we've been there. Like, yeah, I made mistakes too. It's kind of funny. But anyone else would probably be mortified. Like, that's not funny. Like that's not funny at all. In that regard, that's something serious. And it's like, yeah, but you got to kind of laugh about it. But there's a yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like I was gonna say, humor is a big piece, of course, in our communities. Some would argue even like, oh, natives, man, they can't take anything seriously. There's always memes and stuff about everything, right? And so, but I was at a conference once, and there's this African American gentleman who was presenting, and his presentation was on humor in counseling, you know. And I was like, and when I went in that session, I was like, this dude better be funny because I was like, you can't have a session about humor and like not be funny, right? And he was really funny, but he brought something up about dynamics of humor in mental health, and he's like, we're taught that humor or smiling or even laughing, is something you're supposed to just do when you're happy, or when you're stress free or when you're not going through trauma or you don't have anxiety or depression or anything like that. Or there's no, like, nothing is going on in your life. And then he said something that really stuck with me. He's like, as an African American man in America, he's like, if I was not supposed to smile or laugh every time I went through something traumatic or, something stressful or something was going on in my community, he was like, I would never smile again for the rest of my life. And I was like, dang, that's true for natives too. It's like, man, we're always going through stuff. Our communities are, you see all stuff on the news, right? And everything. But it's like, but that doesn't mean you can't still indulge, in that in humor. It's healing. It's a part of our communities, right? In that regard. And so maybe if AICF brings me back in the future, we'll do a one on humor. And so how humor can be it. So but then I'll have to be funny. And so might be a tall order. So but yeah, so yeah,
I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, and let's see. Uh, just trying to think I feel respected. I think that's one of them.
okay.
Yeah. I just I guess things are just lining up with how I'm trying to, navigate, and that's a good thing. So yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, it's good to have everybody here, and it's nice to meet a new person. And so to keep going, we also went over in the third session, second session, the four dynamics of mental well-being or healthy well-being, which is biological, psychological, social, spiritual, and with our lessons in Navajo teachings on Pajol. And so to get into this week's session, which I'm gonna incorporate stuff we talked about last week as well, because we're all tying this one's all tying it all together, right? All the stuff we kind of learned and how to apply it, right? And so but first off, who here you've heard of the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, or ACEs study as it's referred to? So the Adverse Childhood Experience Study is a study that's been going on really the last 20 years, and it's really taken off. It's very um essentially what it is, it's real fast. It's a 10 question questionnaire, and they ask people this when they're adults, so over the age of 18, and they'll ask people these questions, and how they're relevant to their childhood, and they correlate it with issues they may be navigating now, like diabetes, health issues, smoking, drinking, anxiety, depression, stuff like that, right? And of course, the purpose of it, right, is the connection to show like, hey, everything kind of you went through before the age of 18 definitely can affect, what you're going through as an adult. Things like in some of the studies are very different because they're done in different communities, but some of them it's like, oh, if you have, it's called your ACEs score. So if you answer yes to, like, say you answer three of them, yeah, I went through these three things, then your ACEs score would be three, right? And but say you went through six of them, oh, I have an ACEs score of six. And then there's all sorts of statistics. Oh, if you have an ACEs score of six or above, you are 95% more likely to stay an alcoholic if you become one. Not become an alcoholic, but stay one if you do become one. Stuff like that, right? In that regard, or health implications and stuff. And so the purpose of the study is to show, oh, kind of the higher A score is kind of the harder your life's going to be as an adult, right? There's definitely some things. But to go over the questions, to give you all some context for it. So, um, so why is it not moving? There we go. All right. So the 10 questions. So while growing up, so this is before the age of 18, did a parent or adult often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Two, did a parent or adult household push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that it left marks? Three, did an adult or person 5 years old ever touch or fondle you or touch your body in a sexual way or ask you to do sexual things to them? Four, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, support each other? Five, did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Your parents were too inebriated to protect you, or take you to the doctor? Six, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Seven, was your parent ever or often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at them? Sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with the fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly threatened with a gun or knife? Eight, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic who used street drugs? Nine, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member ever attempt suicide? And 10, did a household member ever go to prison? Right. Some pretty heavy questions, right? In that sense, so man, it's some pretty heavy stuff, right? But with the ACEs studies, in that regard, the importance of them is getting a quick kind of synopsis of what people may be going through or went through when they were younger. And so, but a big piece of this, right, is that correlation, like I said, with what you're going through now, right? And interestingly, when I was at Georgia State University, the people who facilitated the study actually came and talked to us, or the original one, like the OG one from through the CDC, like the CDC, like came and presented to us, and it was amazing, And so afterwards, of course, I asked one of the women, I was like, hey, like, has anyone ever done this study on like a tribal nation? And she's like, yeah, actually we have. She's like, we did one in South Dakota, and so she's like with Rosebud Reservation. And so she's like, we took one group from off the reservation who were primarily white. And she's like, and we took, of course, the on reservation. So, and I was like, oh, okay. And so she sent me the study and I read it. And she's like, yeah, and you can talk about it in the future if you want to, just reference us and stuff. I was like, oh, cool. But it was really interesting and kind of heartbreaking. I mean, we're actually looking at doing an ASA study here on Navajo. So I'm in the process of getting one going through our tribal IRB, which is fun, like loosely used. It's fun. But it much needed, of course. But with the results I read with the South Dakota one, it was like it's kind of what I expected of ours, honestly, too. Because now tribes are just barely starting to do these ASA studies. You kind of know homes are bad, sometimes on the reservations or in border towns, but it's like we don't really know exactly how bad with quantitative data. But the off-reservation people, 50% of the people had zero. So they'd never experienced a traumatic event in their entire life, or before the age of 18, I should say. And then one had like 20%, or 20% had one. And then it kind of tapers down like 9%, whatever. But the on reservation residents was like 20% of them had never experienced a traumatic event. But then it was 20 had experienced one and 20 had experienced, so on and so forth. But what was really alarming was on the reservation, 20% of the people, so 1 in 5 people had experienced six or more traumatic events in their life before the age of 18. And I was like, that is so sad. But like I said, I was like, that kind of makes sense, like from what I've seen growing up with in my own family or like my own homies and stuff like that. Like, yeah, you know. But one thing that was really interesting, right, was the correlating piece with this study, right, when they brought it up was, um, with the smoking and, drinking, things like that, depression scales, the PHQs. One thing that was really interesting was that the people on the reservation, as you can see here, actually drank less than the people off the reservation. So although they've been through substantially more trauma than the people off the reservation, they actually were using less substances than them, which of course it destroys the whole ACEs model. It's like, no, these people are supposed to be torn up. They're supposed to be miserable. They're supposed to this, and that, right? But then also too, it really shed this narrative, right, of oh, that Native Americans are drunks, right? Or that, we are just troublemakers, in that sense. And so, but this research also came to light or brought to light to me, that learning that as Indigenous people, sure, Indigenous people struggle with substances and things like that, as we've all seen, but we're actually one of the most abstinent demographics in the United States. But though people who do struggle with substances, the reason for it, as we've seen, right, is there's no support. There's no programming out on our reservations. There's no like people going out there doing this work in that sense, right? And so that's the main piece, kind of reading between the lines with this in that sense as well, too, of like why these people just aren't in shambles, right? In that sense, because on paper they should be, right? In regards to all the other ACEs studies in that sense. So maybe some other factors you think that keep people from, in that sense, from struggling severely in those ways. Any ideas? Absolutely, right. And that's a big piece of it, as we talked about either last session or the one before, right? Of hey, as Indigenous people, we weren't even allowed legally to practice our beliefs until 1978, right? And we think about that before that. We talk a lot about boarding schools, but we don't really talk much about people being institutionalized, right? Like for us, we had generations of our healers incarcerated, right? Literally put in psych wards and things like that, right? Like, imagine what that do to the US right now if you took every counselor, every doctor, every social worker, every physical therapist, every personal trainer and threw them in prison. Oh, it'd be a disaster, right? In that regard. People would just, what would people do? Where would people go if all our nurses were in prison? In that sense. So I love the way you put it, Jeremiah, right? Hey, we are coming back to that. We're coming back to this notion of stepping into, like we talk about humility, right? Having the humility to like, hey, I really don't know what I'm doing, but maybe I should change a little bit. Maybe I should be more open to therapy or encouraging my kids. Maybe I should be more affectionate, to my kids, and things like that. And so, because it is a generational thing. And so because of that, to go back to what we talked about last time, these ecological kind of circles, right? As you can see, like, oh, starts with the person, it gradually moves out to your family, like your immediate family, things like that. Maybe move out to your extended family, people at school, really good friends, affiliations, and then out a little more out like your workplace, society in general, stuff like that. So as we mentioned last time, right? Last time we were picking out issues in all of these, right? Hey, there's problems in all of these, but this time, this class, we're talking about how there's healing in every single one of these. So using these models when we are in need, I think that's a big piece of that ACEs dynamic, right? And why I brought it up is when we don't have support in a certain way, we look in another place, right? Of, hey, if this, I don't have the strength in me, I look to my family. And if I can't look to my family, I look to my friends. And if I can't look to my friends, I look to my community, right? Or even it goes as far back. Hey, there's sometimes I don't have anybody. I look to my ancestors, right? In that sense, give me strength. Look to the holy people or whatever your spirituality is in that sense, right? So there's strength in kind of every level, right? So yeah, there's issues in every level. There's issues in our society, definitely, right? MMIW, MMIP, right? In that sense, in a national level, but also right there within our community, substance use from a personal perspective in that regard. And so analyzing for yourselves, being smart about your rhythm and how this plays into it, right? Because like I said at the beginning, sometimes your rhythm can be brought to a screeching halt, in that regard. And as we see in the ACEs study, right, our communities, it's on paper, it's quantitatively analyzed that we go through more trauma in our communities than other communities do, But as Indigenous people, how do we keep that rhythm going? Because as we also mentioned with Jesse, right, in the humor, right, hey, you can't just stop, you can't just stop. You have to do something, you have to keep your rhythm going in that regard. And so, and as we talked about 2 sessions ago, you can't just use resilience, right? You can't just lower your head and push through because, yeah, you get through it, but will you be the person that comes out on the other side that maybe you need to be or that you want to be? Probably not, in that regard. And so, and you see that a lot right now with COVID and everything, right? And so I had a client who came in a couple months ago and man, they were angry, they were really upset and they were like, but I can't figure out why, I can't figure out what's going on. So me being a therapist, like, well, let's figure it out. Let's talk. Let's see what's going on. And, they were just like, yeah, with finally we kind of got to it, they were like, oh, well, I'm really upset that we figured it out of like they expressed to me, they were like, it's really aggravating seeing all these posters for COVID, right? Because they were like, they're like now, like you can get shots anywhere for it. You can get the vaccine anywhere. You can get taken care of anywhere. And they're like now it's just frivolous. People are even joking about it on Facebook, about how well COVID's done and things like that. And they brought up, they were like, where was this stuff 2 years ago when my mom died? Why couldn't this be available then? Why is it so frivolous now? Why couldn't it be back then in that sense? And they're like, it's unfair. And I was like, it is unfair. It's unfair you lost your mother to COVID. And that now it's just you can get the vaccine anywhere, you know. So that anger, right, from grief, right, in that sense as well too. But yeah, there's a lot of people who went through this. I don't know a single person in my community that didn't lose someone they knew, or someone from their community. But yet there's a lot of people just pushing through it, right, in that regard. And so instead of processing their grief, letting themselves feel it in that regard. So if they feel like their rhythm is still going right, but it stopped a while ago. And so because it keeps bringing them back, or it may bring them back almost in a permanent sense, right? Because we had a lot of people during COVID relapsing, they were experiencing suicide ideation. So it's like processing in real time was really hard for even them, right? And so with that, it's important to recognize as well with your rhythm in that regard, pieces of it, like as indigenous people, it's always vital. I like to bring up about your circadian rhythm, right? So who here knows what a circadian rhythm is? So your circadian rhythm, right, is it's like your life rhythm, right? In that regard, when you wake up, when you go to sleep, even how you eat, your quality of your sleep that you have, right, in that regard. And so your circadian rhythm is this fluid motion through life of, hey, how I manage, things and take care of my body in that, right? So your circadian rhythm, right, is this rhythm that your body goes by. But a lot of people don't realize that your circadian rhythm actually shifts a lot, in that sense. It's not just one uniform thing, although we try to make it, right? Oh, I do have the same schedule or same routine all year round, you know. When the reality of it is, in the winter time, there's a reason why we feel more sleepy. There's a reason why we gain weight in that time, right? And it's because our circadian rhythm's telling you, hey, it's time to relax. The days there's not as much sunlight, now's the time to relax, which is really congruent with our culture, right? As Navajos during the wintertime, it's a time for fixing our tools, it's a time for family, it's a time for stories, it's a time for prayer in that regard. So we validate that, hey, it's a time to kind of more just relax. A long time ago, they say we didn't even used to go to war during the winter. It's almost a fight in the cold, but also too, there was that respect even amongst communities, right? Of, hey, like the wintertime is a time of family, a peacetime. And so with that sense, when your circadian rhythm, as indigenous people in this regard, as you go into your professions and work on your rhythm of life, think about how you manage your circadian rhythm. And not just from a Eurocentric standpoint, but from an indigenous standpoint. What are your cultural teachings on seasons, right? In that regard? What does spring in your community mean? What does summer? What does fall? What does winter mean in your community? And how are you maintaining that in that sense in your life, in your body, right? Because like I was telling a lot of clients, right, during winter time, they get kind of antsy and things like that, But I would talk with them about, wintertime teachings from Navajos, right? In the same sense, well, what are you preparing for? In this coming year, what are you preparing for? Almost kind of like a New Year's resolution, right? Hey, what are you planning for, right? In that sense. Because as I mentioned, our teaching, right, with wintertime is, like I said, fixing tools. Wintertime is a time for preparation. And so in the wintertime, you fix your tools, get do all your leather work to make new stuff for your horses, you get seeds together, things like that. Because Navajos, we start planning when you hear the first thunder. So our teaching, right, is, hey, once you hear the first thunder, it's not like, oh man, I need to fix all my tools, man. My shovel's all jacked up, or whatever. I need to get stuff for my horses. You're ready, right? You get up and you go. So with clients, whether they're in school or not, oh man, I'm working so hard. I want to be a nurse or whatever. Okay. Well, how are you ensuring, how are you preparing that you're going to be the nurse that you want to be right now in this winter time of life? Because what if someone is making a nurse right now? What if someone says, oh yeah, you're a nurse, right? Probably be terrible at it. Probably maybe hurt somebody, maybe do some stuff that's unethical because you just didn't know. But you got to go through that winter time. You got to process these things. But first, you got to be aware of it that it's even happening. So I don't know y'all's cultures or communities and things like that, but delve into those teachings because we're taught kind of in a uniform way, of, hey, like in the wintertime, people still go to work at the same time. They still maintain the same caseloads. They still do the same work. And, I would argue even, one of my points of view is even that's why suicide ideation and drinking is so prevalent during the holidays too, in that regard. The highest rates of suicide ideation, is during the holidays, Why? Because you add on the stuff of, oh, worried about finances because you're buying all sorts of stuff for Christmas for people that don't even like you. You're around all these crowds, you're not taking care of your health, as Andres could probably tell you too, one of the highest times of people going to the hospitals during the holidays. And when I asked my friend about it, I was like, why is that? And he's like, it's actually one of the biggest reasons is people stop taking their insulin or they eat too much sugar, So he's like, we get a lot of people that come to the hospital just for that alone. I was like, dang, that's crazy, and so think about that in your cultural teachings and how that plays into your rhythm of life, because we usually don't go by it. A lot of us have just adjusted to Eurocentric values of, oh, I'm going to stay the course. I know I have, right? Of, oh, stay the course, keep doing the exact same thing. But as of the past couple of years, I've tapered off. Hey, I'm not going to be on as many committees. I'm not going to commit to as many things during the winter time. Maybe even I've talked to my boss of, hey, I'm going to see a couple clients less a week, to have those 2 hours more available, for me to do whatever, to keep on top of things. And he was completely accommodating of it, right? In that sense. And so, yeah. Anyways, does anybody else have, what on the spot, like what is your teaching in wintertime from your community? And that absolutely, and that's one of the biggest things, right? Because as medical professionals, or even as therapists, what is the first things that we check is for somatic issues, right? One of the first things you ask, hey, what is going on with your body? Are you navigating any chronic health issues? Does your family have any chronic health issues that they've been navigating? Right? Because it's so vital, but nearly every person I know, or every client I get, every person I know in my personal life is no one gets enough sleep, right? Nobody. Nobody I know is like, man, I actually get so much sleep, man, I'm so well rested every day. Like, huh? Like for real? Like, what do you do? Like, in that regard. And oftentimes even that's scrutinized, right? Say someone's like, man, I slept like 10 hours last night. Oh, it must be nice, or something, like, but it's like same thing. Like, how are you monitoring your circadian rhythm and keeping that flow of life, right? Because when you give your body a chance to heal, right, and rest, you're giving your mind, your spirit, your family as well, too, right? Our interactions with that, as we talked about last time. And those are important dynamics to address, um as we go forward in our lives, right? And so when I was working, or actually I was making my son's cradle board, right? And with this medicine man. And so I was making my son's cradle board, and it was interesting because he was asking me a lot about my work, the work I do and stuff. And then of course talking with him about what he does and stuff. And so when making my son's cradle board, one of the things he asked me, he was like, oh, like who's the primary people you see in your program, like for mandated people? I'm like, actually the majority of them are kind of like most of them are men, of course. Probably about 80% of our clients are men. But then I was like, of those 80% of men, probably half of them are in some sort of trade field. I was like they're welders or iron workers, journeymen, linemen, carpenters, or just outright, construction workers. Right. And he's like, oh, okay. Yeah. And he's like, that makes sense. And he asked me, he's like, why do you think that is? And I was like, kind of gave the counseling answer. I was like, they're away from their families, they're away from kind of support. Their work is extremely grueling, in that sense, and physically exhausting, and so, and I was like, and of course, those professions, there's kind of a big drinking culture in them, right, in that sense. And so and he was okay, it was all right. So, um, then he told me something that really stuck with me, right, in that regard. And he told me a story. He was like, as indigenous people, he's like, as human beings, we're five-finger beings. And he told me, he was like, and as five-finger beings, he's like, we're very unique in nature that we have the innate ability to create things, right? So he's like, with our hands, we can create things. And so, and he's like, and these men that are in these professions, he's like, because in my program, right, there's DUI clients, domestic violence clients, and CPS clients, like I said. And he was like, these men, some of them go for years, decades, some of them their whole lives. He's like, they'll build homes for other people. They'll build workplaces for other people. They'll build hospitals for other people, restaurants for other people in that sense. And he's like, so when they use up all that ability to create and to build and they go home, he was like, what then can they do? Because he's like, as human beings and five-fingered beings, he's like, we also have the innate ability to destroy, right? And as we know, right, as humans, we are pretty good at destroying stuff, right? In that sense. And so he's like, they don't have that creative energy. They go home and all they can do with their own families is destroy. So he's like, many of them don't build homes for their own families. They don't build, schools for their families. They don't build their kids' educations in that sense, right? And that like really stuck with me, because I was like, that is true. And when we talked about that in groups, right, that lesson and everything, some people get really emotional, when we talk about it. Some of these men are like, you know, I I built extravagant homes, I built really cool stuff. I'm so good at what I do, but I never built my own grandma Hogan. I've never built my kids something that will last them for generations. And so with that, right, what I would tell people in regard to your rhythm, think about your rhythm. And as y'all as young students or professionals in that, right, of what you're building for yourself, right? Because no matter what you're doing, no matter what profession you're in, where you're at, you need to always be building for yourself too. Because you can get real caught up in building for other people, right? In that sense. My organization, man, the work we do, oh man, I do a lot of outside work and my work loves that I do that, right? But I'm always building something for myself too. I got my certificate today. I was really happy because I do when I was in grad school, I did the uh applied suicide intervention skills training or assist. It's a 2-day suicide intervention training. And I really wanted to get certified in it when I was in school. And I did. So, today I did my third one, and so I'm officially certified in it. So I was really happy today. I was like, yeah, cool. Man, it's really cool to get the certificate. And so that's for me. That's something for me that I can build with, right? And so it's something I can take, to build for myself, to build for my family, and things like that. So always think of how you're building for yourself. Because as the medicine man said as well, too, when you leave a job, you should never just be stranded. You should always have something in line for yourself, because that way you ensure that you're not just taking care of yourself, but that you're taking care of your families, that you're taking care of your families to come, that you're taking care of your grandkids, your great grandkids in that way. So, but we're really awful about taking care of ourselves, right, in that sense. But this is why I bring this up, right? Of as people think about what am I building in my life, and what is the price? What am I destroying? Because in college, right, people joke about, oh, the freshman 15, and all that stuff, right? Gaining weight as a freshman. But literally, like, we're building our education, our future, getting a degree, but sometimes we destroy our bodies in the process, right? I did shoot through drinking. Man, I was terrible in that sense. I was high performing. I was a high performing drunk. So I was passing all my classes. I graduated, but it was like, but at what cost? You know, I just, I wasn't taking care of myself at all. So, so to open it up, what do y'all want to build for yourselves? You know, what do you want to use your hands to build for you in that sense? You know, and I know people, oh, I want to get my degree and do this and this, but genuinely, what's something you want to build for you in that sense? And I'm asking, this is an actual question, it's not rhetorical. So, does anybody want to share? What do you genuinely want to build for yourself or create for you? Absolutely. And why is that so vital to you, or why do you want that to be an integral piece of who you are? Absolutely. And that's amazing. I love that you want to do that. That's that's really incredible and vital, right? And that's what like something we talked about a couple sessions ago. Hey, we talk about historical trauma or historical knowledge, or epigenetics, but it's like there's healing there too, or we already have the knowledge to do certain things, right? Like it tripped me out the other day. I saw this article and it was about like, and they called it the first war of Pearl Harbor, and I was like, oh, okay. And but they were talking about, because you hear about Pearl Harbor a lot, right? About, of course, it being attacked, but they were like, but Pearl Harbor, they're like actually, they were like used to be one of the greatest ecosystems in the world, and they talked about how the indigenous people had all these fish farms there and like had these like systems that they were so like just environmentally conscious and everything. And I was like, dang, that's cool. But then, of course, it was colonized, and I was like, dang, I was like, it sucks. But it was so interesting to learn, that the diversity that was there. And I'm like, that knowledge is still there with those people. So it's really cool. You want to do that and ride on for wanting to build that. So you want to build for yourself. And when you say family, what in particular do you want to build? Absolutely. And I love that you bring that up, and especially the line of work that you're in and going into, right? Is same thing. There's people in these professions, they'll build other people's families, right? Oh, I see that, other people's kids, or social workers, hey, I help bring families together and resolve things, help bring them resources. But yet, what happens sometimes, as we see a lot in these professions, hey, they have an extremely high rate too of substance use, right? Or suicide ideation or neglecting themselves, right? In that regard. And so I love hearing that I want to build my family, my family I want to build. That's what I want to do with this power to create and manifest in that regard. Anyone else want to share what they want to build? Yeah, my lady, she's Oglala, and like she'll get those letters in the mail from those oil companies and stuff like that, or like offers to like, hey, we give you this amount of money for your land, and I'm like, man, that's crazy. Like that's something that's really great. I love that that's where your head's at, right? In that sense of in that regard. Because like you brought it up perfectly. Oh, there's kind of that promise of like, oh, what if they do find something? Then man, we can make some money, in that regard. And so, but in that regard, you're keeping that integrity. Like, no, I want to build something. And that's actually what I want to talk about next, right? Or wrap up with in that regard is a lot of times like we talked about last session, right? With the strength versus deficit based dynamic, like, hey, there's our community's all deficits, there's no one to really look to. Clients I work with, right? A lot of clients are like, oh, like I'm the first person in my family who's sober. Like I don't have anyone to look to. I don't have any mentors. It's all deficits. There's no strength in my family, where, I give them examples like, tell me about your family. Oh, my dad, he's so stubborn. You can't tell him anything. Man, he's just so hard headed and things like that. Well, there's a strength. And they just look at me all puzzled, like, what? No, man, that dude's a trip. He's an a-hole. But I'm like, but you're gonna need to be an a-hole in your sobriety. Tell me if you're gonna stay sober with the bros you have or your cousins that you're not gonna need to be stubborn in that regard. That there's gonna be people who won't take no for an answer. They're gonna keep trying. They're gonna try to humiliate you. They're gonna try to coax you, but you're gonna have to be stubborn, right? In that regard. So same thing, right? Flipping that notion, but now looking at in our community of doing that, right? In that sense. And so with that, when I work with clients, right, there's this approach I use. So to go back to the ecological, kind of construct for a bit. Um, actually I'll just stop sharing and we can just finish this like this. Um, but who here you've seen that movie Moneyball? Like everybody seen Moneyball or anybody seen Moneyball? Who else seen Moneyball? So, so Moneyball, right? And oddly, like, it's a really good movie, but a lot of my clients haven't seen it. And so I always have to explain to them. So, But in the movie Moneyball, right, in that regard, because well, to start off for context, a lot of times in our communities, right, there's kind of sure we may not have stable people. There's kind of that one person, right? Oh, like there's this person, or hey, I have this one friend, in that regard, that they're just really incredible person, in that regard, and I could go to them, or I could depend on them, or whatnot. But then it's like, well, what if that person's not there? What if they move away, or unfortunately, if they pass away in that regard, right? And so as Andres brought up, right, an important thing to recognize is to build as well too, to build yourself. It is a communal effort. You are gonna need support from people. Like I said, for me, like yeah, I'm sober and I've been sober 8 years, but I still go to meetings. When something comes up for me, I go to a meeting. I lean on my community in that regard, and so with that, the Moneyball approach, right? So in Moneyball, it's about like the Oakland A's back in the day. Like it's like the 90s, isn't it, Julio, or something like that? But anyway, so during that time in baseball, it was a big thing of like, oh, I want the baseball player that can do it all. Man, that can hit, that can run, that, can steal bases, that um can field as well when they're on defense. They can field and everything like that. So people are paying just ridiculous amounts of money for these players, right? Hey, a player that can do it all, because that's what's going to win it is a player that can do it all, right? But the Aces, they brought up this thing called Moneyball, right? And so essentially they recognize like, hey, we actually realize, we don't need a person that can do all of this stuff. We just kind of need a person that can do each of these things. So they were like, hey, here's a person, who can hit, man. They can hit home runs and everything like that, but their fielding is terrible, in that regard. And here's a person, man, for some reason they get on base. People just walk this person. They don't throw them strikes. So, hey, that person's on base. Hey, here's a person, man, they can really field, but they're older, right? And so people they're not really on anybody's radar. And so, they took all these pieces, these strengths from different parts of, the league and things and put it in a team. And it sucked at first. Oh, they were getting whooped. They were losing, but then it panned out and they actually went to the World Series, in that regard, and they lost, and still now, so sure, now there's these big names, of course, people want, in that regard, but now Moneyball is a part of every organization. Hey, if we can pick up this person that can steal bases, if we can pick up this person that's a good fielder for like just a little bit of money, then why not? We don't, not all of our players have to be this big person. So I use this example with our clients, right, of and native people that we may not have that one person, but maybe using this Moneyball effect and realizing, hey, I can depend on different people in different ways or get certain information from people in my community. And like people say, leave the rest, right, in that regard. So, this kind of notion came up to me too when everything was going on with Sherman Alexie, right? And I was like, hey, like I asked one of my mentors, like, what do we do with that? As Native men, we don't have many mentors, or people to look up to in that sense, in Maine society. And here Sherman Alexie was a prolific writer, made movies that are kind of really canons in our communities, right? But then got in trouble, for like all sorts of terrible stuff. But then that person told me, they're like, well, take these lessons, but leave the rest. No, as humans, we're not perfect, so take what works for you and just leave the rest. So, and I bring this example with clients because people always say my best friend, right? Oh, I have one best friend, I have that best friend, they're everything to me. But it's like, I have multiple best friends, I have multiple best friends. When I play Moneyball in my life, I recognize people that in my life that really help me in that sense. But if you look for that one person that can do everything, you're not going to find them, or you may overwhelm them. So for me, my self-care, I love playing basketball, right? I love playing basketball in that sense. I love hooping, in that sense. And so go there, play with my bros that play ball. So get some self-care, right, in that regard. The same thing, would I go to those same guys for financial advice? Probably not, right? In that sense, there's people in my family that maybe have done a little bit better financial wise and stuff. But same thing, those same people, would I depend on them for potentially like, staffing a client. Right. In that sense, they'd be terrible at it 'cause that's not what they do. And that's, not ethical anyways. But in that regard, so people I work with, right? Hey, people I work with, they can give me solid advice work wise, can help me out and things like that. But would I trust them to watch my son? Probably not, in that regard. And so, but people, and it's so on and so forth. And so there's different people in different parts of your life, that fall into this model and that you can use to help you build too, in that sense. But using that approach, recognizing who is in my community, who's there. It doesn't have to be this one person, that has to do everything for me. Oh, here's my friend, man. I play basketball with them. They gave me financial advice. They watch my son. They can do it all. They're perfect. Those types of people don't really exist. And so, as Native people, you do have to lean on your community and learn, in that regard. And so, you know, and it's funny like that, right? In that sense, even with Julio, Julio, we met and connected with this part and everything. And it's just kind of like, oh, do Julio and I hang out all the time? No. We barely even text each other. But same thing, we've helped each other out professionally, in ways that was kind of really bizarre how we met in that regard. And so, me to wrap up in my sobriety as well, there's times I struggle, like I've said, and part of my Moneyball aspect is there's a guy in Atlanta who I met when I lived there, and he's been, sober for 20 years. And I call him maybe once a year, like especially on the anniversary when I lost some friends in Afghanistan, you know, and that's all. And he doesn't, we don't try to make small talk. Hey, what's up? What do you think of, the Suns or whatever, he knows, hey, I call and he's a part of my Moneyball. Hey, when I call him, it's all business and he's there for me. And so, but he doesn't try to make it other things like, oh, well, let's have this small talk or, hey, how's everything? We know we're there for each other in that capacity. And so think about using your community in that way, because there's a lot of people who are really yearning to, in that regard. Like when Julio and I started talking, I was like, man, I'd love to help you, man. I love doing this stuff. I love, helping people in these capacities, in that regard. And so and Julio's helped me too. And so, but that was a really great connection, of strengths we get from each other, but at the same time, like, hey, Julio, let's Zoom every day, or whatever. Like, when are you coming out to Arizona or I'll go out to Oklahoma and see you? We know what it is. It'd be cool to see each other, but we're also a part of our Moneyball story, right? In that sense. So yeah, but yeah, that's what we had for today. So is there any comments or questions or feedback or anything you'll have? Thanks, I appreciate that. And I'm glad, I got to meet you. So and that's something I always advocate for in our community, like I mentioned before that, as a native male who focuses on addictions work, as an LPC, I've only met one other native man doing that, and I've been doing this like 5 or 6 years. And so it really lifts my heart, to see other men, especially in the work that I do. Like I said, oh, it's mostly men, but it's so cool, like seeing them heal their families, seeing them heal each other, in that regard. And so, yeah, thank you for that, Andres. I appreciate it. It does mean a lot. My pleasure. And, I think it's really wonderful to be able to do this. And so, Um, yeah, I love doing things like this, and same thing. I love meeting people like y'all. As we saw in our last session, I was like, man, it's inspiring. Man, hearing people just open up or say things they never said before. But I mean, y'all really inspire me in that sense as well. So, you know, I do this because I just love doing it. I love helping. I love being a part of people helping themselves, and y'all help me too, so you help me grow so I get stuff out of it as well, in that sense. And so, yeah, thank you all. And, I really appreciate it. And